All right, so we have talked about prisoners' rights in last chapter, and now we want to talk about the construction of prisons in more detail. You recall in the previous chapter we talked about the hands-off doctrine. Then it evolved into the one hand on, one hand off doctrine, and all of this is dealing with the management of prisons. We're going to look at some of that in this chapter 6. And again, please make sure you're following the syllabus. We do skip around a bit. Not every single chapter in this text is assigned, so you want to be clear that you're looking at the information that we're covering at the time. And it's the final chapter before the midterm. Please make note, young people. Please make note the midterm is a week from today, March 11th. Yeah, March 11th. Wait, March 10th. I apologize. March 10th. At our normal class time, and it'll be proctored on e-learning. So please make a note of that. As always, you want to get a sense of what you want to know at the end of each chapter. Take in some of this here for a moment, and we'll begin a lecture on this in detail. So the chapter begins by discussing Joyce Mitchell, someone obviously you will not see on the midterm next week, but Joyce is notable, and they begin with her because she's a former worker at the Clinton Correctional Facility in New York State, and she got major headlines in June of 2015 as she assisted Richard Matt and David Sweat in an escape from their prison. And the details of this, again, reading some of this stuff and looking at some of these cases, like I said, it's a lot more entertaining at times, in my view at least, is some of the things even you'll see on TV, there's a phrase called stranger than fiction, such as life, that there are things you just can't make up that are oftentimes, have higher entertainment value than some scripted work. So in this case, Joyce, I forget which one off the top of my head that she was involved with. I believe it was Richard Matt. Whichever this cat is, they were dating while he was in prison. She was working as a nurse there, I believe. And, Richard, he spent that game at her. Hey, baby, I love you. Boom, 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 boom. I'm pretty sure, actually, she was married at the time, but clearly, having a relationship with this cat was, more alluring than whatever she may have had going on. So with hopes that they could be together once, he escaped with her assistance, that was her motivation behind helping them. And keep this in mind, right? Because a lot of things that, a lot of crimes and things like this, they go on inside prison, and at times this can be pretty substantial. Oftentimes are done with the assistance of, people are working on the inside. Part of this, quite frankly, is just the salary of many of these positions compared to the work challenges and dangers and everything that if you can get paid off, and obviously in this case she also is going to get some promises of financial reward, that could be pretty no pun intended seducing. They spent 10 days searching for the gentleman, but eventually found him and returned him back to Clinton. And Miss Mitchell there, she ended up getting 2.5 to 7 years, of course, with good time that could be reduced. So yeah, she may be out by now. Google that, and you can find out for sure. So Joyce may be back at the crib, particularly under COVID. One of the things that happened is that a lot of low-level offenders, were getting released. Anyway, again, when we talk about prisons, one of the things you want to speak to in your paper is the rising prison population, and this is important and it's political because of the just high levels of costs associated with constructing prisons. As of this publication, it was 40 billion each year, 40 billion with a B. And I would encourage you as you read through some of this stuff, and just to have some context, was somebody like myself that's so far away from being a millionaire or a billionaire. I know at times it can be hard to really put these numbers in context, but I would encourage you to look at like some of the money that we spend on other things, education, pay for military veterans, infrastructure, and then look at the just amazing amounts of money that's spent on prisons. And one of the things that you certainly want to know, and this is accounted for, with inflation and everything, that the cost of prisons in 1986 was just 12 billion. And for each and every one of us, that totals out to $125 per year. I'm not sure about you all young people, but I could find some other things to do with that $125. And I think that, we could also do so much, do a lot to do so much. We also could, go a long way towards actually rehabilitation in a way that, oftentimes is lacking in the institutions currently. So why does it cost so much, you ask? Again, that costs for 40 billion each year. One of the major reasons is advanced security, and we'll talk about that in great detail in the second half of the course. Some of the designs of the prisons themselves, cost a lot of money in terms of the doors, camera systems, systems to try and prevent escapes like we saw there in Clinton Correctional. And then, again, one of the things that we really need to be thinking about is, most of these prisons are going to be housed for a long time. And we have to pay for their food, their health care, and healthcare costs are the leading expense for Americans. And in many cases, at least previously, was the leading cause of bankruptcy. Like, healthcare costs as you get older is, a considerable amount of your budget. That's true for inmates as well. They don't have a budget, so we have to pay that for them. Let's look a bit more closely at the basic demographics of who the average inmate is. So when we talk about inmate populations here, we'll look at on average who this population of individuals are, much in the way that we would say that the average population of of students at Allen is probably age 20, majority, over a majority African American from South Carolina, Christian, female, and potentially an athlete. So the same things here, demographic, profile, if you will, of the average inmate in America. Take this in. Don't just look at the numbers themselves. Those are important, but just have a general context of the wider discussion that is going to inform some of the things we talk about throughout this chapter. Now, bear in mind that when you go through this slide here on the Federal Bureau of Prisons, um, that most inmates are housed in state correctional facilities. So people, again, most of the people who are in prison in South Carolina have broken South Carolina laws. But we do have well over 200,000 that are in federal facilities as well. And these federal facilities are overseen by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which was established in 1930. Now, one of the things that we talked about that began to get introduced in the late 19th century um, with some of the prison reforms that went on in that time was contract labor. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It is labor, again, the labor system where prison labor is used to manufacture goods for private companies, Microsoft, Purdue, Sprint, Verizon, Nike. I don't know that all those companies, some of those companies, Microsoft most notably, have absolutely been involved in, historically, I don't believe they are now, but have been involved in the prison manufacturing contract labor population, but a lot of like manufacturers and things of that nature oftentimes may be housed in prisons. Again, these are kind of things where if you want to do just a quick Google or YouTube search, you probably can find more information that I think you find helpful and entertaining. So again, these prisoners, well, wards of the state, they work to furnish tools and materials under work supervision. Recall last chapter, we talked about prisoners' rights. I forget the cat's name in Texas, but 600 bale of cotton had fell on top of him while he was, working as a contract laborer in prison. Ended up having major health defects as a result of that. Under this, you have the piece price system where they furnish raw materials and prisoners are at least paid for their completed goods. Now, they're not making anywhere near market value for this work, but they can keep something that they can accumulate on their books that they can use to purchase goods that they need in prison, or they can have waiting for them when they get out, if they get out. And then the convict lease system is where you provide prisoners, quote unquote, on loan, and they do work in farming, construction, mining, and yes, you have that right on plantations under the complete control of the leasee. We don't see this quite as much anymore, if at all, but this was a highly defined feature of the prison system in the early 20th century. You might guess which race of inmates oftentimes were involved in this kind of work. This is what you see on the chain gangs and things of this nature. Now, all this big text here, right? Of course, I do not expect you to write all this down. I'm going to go over this with you brick by brick. But I put all this text up here because it's important. Because, again, as we talked about, most inmates in America, they're locked up in state penitentiaries. In these state pens, again, they have some constitutional rights that we talked about in the last chapter that, are transparently afforded to them. But increasingly, and this is one of the things that intersects with your writing assignments right now, increasingly more and more prisoners are housed in private institutions. Private prisons have come about because, as like we talked about with California, right? California had locked so many people up, and I saw in the quiz you all did really well in identifying the top three, the states with the top 3 prison populations: Florida, Texas, and of course California. So California, their prison population got so thick through the three strikes law in particular, where you gave 25 to life for your third felony, and it involved locking people up for 25 years for stealing socks, for stealing videotapes, for bouncing a check to while they order some pizza. All true stories. So as a result of politicians really being tough on crime in that regard, it actually caused huge taxpayer expense. Now, a way to begin to relieve this more and more, as opposed to, because again, the states they have to fund the prisons. They're the ones that's paying, and by they is we, the taxpayer in those states, are paying for these prisons to remain open. So in this context, as costs begin to rise because you got so many people locked up, a solution to this was the introduction of more and more private prisons where you have corporations running the prisons. Let's look at an example here. So FPI or Unicor would like to think of itself as the gold standard for inmate vocational programs. They employ more than 20,000 inmates, about 25% of the sentenced and medically eligible federal inmate population. An additional 25,000 inmates are on a voluntary waiting list to work on Unicor. FPI has up-to-date equipment, develops a strong work ethic, and pays considerably more than what state prisoners receive from the prison industry. Research on the program suggests that inmates who participate in FPI and other vocational work and work programs are 24% less likely to recidivate compared to those that don't participate. These inmates are also about 14% more likely to be employed within a year following their release from prison. The program suggests that the group that benefits the most are young minorities, those of which are at the greatest risk for recidivism. Yet, there are considerable questions about the BOP exploiting inmates in Unicor by the wages they pay, which are a very small proportion of the profits it makes. So again, in this case, right, the private prisons, they are paying their, the inmates. But as it says, it's far below market value. And we'll talk about, increasingly some of the ethical concerns about this going forward. Let's look more. The private sector now provides prisoners' work programs in medical education and psychological services, financing for prisoner jail construction, and management and operation of prisoner jails. Two companies operate over half the contracts of private correctional facilities: the Corrections Corporation of America and the GEO Group, formerly Wackenhut Corrections. The Corrections Corporation of America operates facilities with 75,000 inmates and 71 correctional institutions across 20 states. They employ more than 13,000 individuals. They operate slightly fewer facilities and house fewer inmates. I'm going to go down to the bottom. Since 1999, the size of the private prison population grew 90%. Let me read that again. Since 1999, the size of the private prison population grew 90%, from 69,000 prisoners in 1999 to the present total. The use of private prisons was at a max in 2012, when 137,200 inmates were housed in private facilities. Let's look a little bit more deeply at the development of private prisons, and we'll talk about some of the very important political ramifications for this that I hope that you all will be, cognizant of. So again, right, we begin with Gary Johnson here, and make note that, as we talked about throughout, and I hope that you discussed throughout your time here at Fair Island University, um, there's few things that are more political than our criminal justice system. And we see this at the heart of the discussion on privatized prisons, where again, it began to increase, like, in state budgets, so states like New Mexico, Ohio, Florida, Nevada, that they saw private prisons, and Republicans often believe that private corporations can do things a lot more efficiently than government. So these ideas were particularly attractive. So private prisons, again, was a solution to the amount, the dent that funding them was put into state budgets. So we see some of the patterns here. But make note, right, that in places like North Carolina, for example, they had to cancel a couple of contracts because they were bringing in prisoners from out of state. And what this speaks to, right, is that at the heart of it, like what a corporation's main goal is doing is to make money. Keep in mind when we talked about the original goals of the correction system in the United States, which was to, rehabilitate, to have people repent in a penitentiary, learn from their mistakes, become better people as a result of being isolated from the public for a while also keeping the public safe from them. But they're able to go on and continue with their lives. That, the goal was not to ruin or destroy their lives by any means. It was just to protect society and hopefully help them get straight in a way that, wasn't happening before. But if your goal here is to profit, and that's the goal of any corporation, not to try and do any social good per se. If they, many corporations do social good, make no mistake. However, that's not their primary goal. Their goal is profit. That's what they're designed to do. So it begs the question that, what if in these private prisons, because they're still paid, like, again, by the state, it just costs less than, like, the state running it itself. So they'll pay, the $85, like, per inmate or something like that. In this way, it, some have suggested that it kind of like, creates a system where if there are not enough customers, then you create some. And you find new reasons to lock people up to make sure that you meet your profit margin. And frankly, again, do your own research on this. There have been several cases like this in states where people have been locked up longer than they should in private prisons, have been in prison for really small, petty crimes that they probably would have been given probation or something like that for, or fine. As we talked about, these things have political consequence. So one of the first things that Joe Biden did actually was to eliminate government contracts with private prisons. Still a long way to go with this on the state level. It is important, though, that you really understand the pros and cons of both. Again, the taxpayer burden of prisons, was getting pretty considerable. So it's understood why they would want to try and, curb that a bit. Totally clear. Some of the proponents of it say that, again, that corporations, again, can run things more effectively and efficiently, and it brings down the costs, again, on us, John Q. Public. They can also increase capacity because they can build prisons a lot more quickly than a state can, who has to go through all types of budgetary processes. They are able to cut a lot more red tape. They believe that, again, like, so I talked about before, we began talking about, your girl Joyce Mitchell. That a lot of times you got people coming into these jobs that are, um, oftentimes not as desired in the marketplace more generally, and don't have as much passion and energy for the work. It's just a job to them, a paycheck. So private prisons believe that they can bring in, a fresher, more energetic workforce. But the many critics of private prisons argue that private prisons, again, to compare them in this way is misleading because even though they may build more quickly, they don't necessarily have to focus on quality. Again, the Constitution mandates that there are certain things that have to be in place, and there's a lot more checks and balance. Well, there are checks and balances on government where if there are things that are not, if your cousin's in prison in a state penitentiary, you have some type of margin where you can leverage that you're a politician and leverage the prison to change those conditions because at least you have some power in terms of the voting booth of nowhere else, and you can really influence, you know, um, public opinion where other people may think like you and agree with you. It's harder to lobby corporations to change things in this way. So again, they build facilities, but again, what is their main goal? What's their main goal? Profit. So they're gonna, just particularly for a community and population like this of undesirable inmates, often black and brown, there isn't just a lot of motivation for them to build these prisons with a high degree of quality. And that's been shown pretty consistently for those who studied these, you know, uh, the rise in private prisons over the last couple of decades. They get higher rates of inmate misconduct. Again, even though they're supposed to attract a more energized professional force, it often does not do that actually. And there's more chaos in private prisons, statistically speaking, than there is in public penitentiaries. They provide inferior services overall. Like I said, the compensation is actually worse than public prisons. As again, you got people that are guarding inmates that are barely making minimum wage. Many of you are probably working part-time jobs where you make more than minimum wage. But people are supposed to guard prisoners for this amount. Again, it's not surprising that as a result you have higher rates of inmate misconduct under this kind of context. Now, when we talk about prisons again, a lot of times again we just hear, "Hey, lock everybody up, throw them in jail," and that sounds wonderful and great, and it's really exciting. But when we talk about prisons, and this is something that you definitely want to study closely and prepare for the exam, please study this closely. That there are different types of prisons. And this, again, stems from the 19th century era of reform in prisons where we recognize that, unlike, again, the Code of Hammurabi, unlike, early, medieval Europe, where we just punish everybody harshly as possible for every crime, we begin to recognize that there are degrees of crimes and degrees of criminal. So we began to separate the prison population from minimum to super. I was going to say minimum to maximum security prisons, but they're also super max, which we'll probably get to on Monday. But let's begin by looking at the minimum security prisons. The first thing that characterizes them is that there's a more relaxed perimeter security of the perimeter. Some of these prisons will even, won't have fences at all. These are obviously not, dangerous criminals by any means. A lot of times, these are cats who get, a year or less on their time. So some of them may have been in wider, more secure prisons previously, and as their sentence winds down, they may be brought to a minimum security prison. Obviously, they can't have a history of violence or anything like that. The dormitories are less secure. Communal shower sinks, and please, again, study these things closely in terms of the construction and setup. These things might seem like, detailed minutia, and some of it may be to a degree, But the important distinctions to remember. Keep in mind we talked about last time in terms of the rights of prisoners. The rights of prisoners. We're not saying that every prisoner just gets carte blanche, like they're Club Med or something. But for somebody that may have done a small crime that merits them being locked up, but in prison for a year or less, are we looking to again ruin this person's life during this time? As a result, these individuals oftentimes are permitted to work outside jobs. They got generous visitation policies. An overall pretty safe environment for both staff and inmates. If you got to work in a prison, oops, I'm so sorry. If you got to work in a prison, this is probably the prison for you. Obviously, the next one will be medium security. You may have dormitories or bunk beds. Sometimes they may even have lockers to store their possessions. Again, these are not violent, threatening criminals, so they can be out of their cells most of the day. These inmates, again, we hope that we can keep the public protected in the meantime, but help them develop some skill sets that will make it where they will not have to come back here or a worse prison. So again, they can work and develop some skills that they can take back into the marketplace with them. They can take courses towards the GED. They can be locked down in some emergencies. Again, this is rare. And bear in mind the purpose of these kind of lockdowns and restriction of freedoms is to make sure that the guards or any would-be visitors are kept safe. So that is a primary aim here. Again, as you get into more dangerous type of criminal, your rights become more restricted. Again, these things are rational. It would not make sense again, it's somebody that may have some minor possessions of marijuana or might be scalping tickets to a sporting event, um, writing bad checks. It would seem unreasonable to put these people in prison with murderers and rapists and people of that nature. One of the problems that occurred with the rising prison population, particularly in places like Florida, California, and Texas, is that after a while they began to run out of space and room in some of these lower level prisons, that they had to begin crowding people in prisons that were not necessarily always meant for the most hardened type of criminals. So you have people with low level offenses mix in with maximum security. And then too, the people that got 25 to life where their third felony, and I shouldn't say felony in quotes, it is a felony, but their third non-violent felony, let me be more clear. Their third non-violent felony would lead them sharing a cell for 25 years to life with somebody that had committed violent felonies. This is not what the system was set up and designed to do. There had been some corrections made since, but it created a lot of problems in the meantime. Again, make note of the construction of these prisons, the double fences. They got watchtowers with housing arm that are housing armed it house armed guards. I apologize. Get a little tongue tied there. So these watchtowers house armed guards. And again, this is different from what you saw with the medium and minimum security prisons. They may have, again, lethal current electric fence in the middle. These prisons are real deal. They're serious. Folks are only let out of their cells 1 out of 24 hours a day. Eat, shower, back in the cage. I apologize. I'm going to take a break soon, so I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to launch into that. But when we talk about like a Tams Correctional Center, like a super is one of the primary supermax prisons in these United States. But it's a bit more limited than many. They are allowed contacts, phone calls. Again, community activists are very limited. Again, you have a lot of activists that often try and get insight into what's going on within the prison to make sure that those prisoners' rights that are protected for all of us in the Constitution are actually being upheld. Inmates could only leave their cells for a shower or exercise alone. These cats are so dangerous, man, where they got to get their food pushed through a slot in the door. Again, it's no cafeteria where everybody's eating in a group. Nah, you are doing everything in your cell. As we talked about, though, it is not natural for human beings to experience this level of isolation. As we're seeing, a lot of us during COVID. Again, it's a challenging time for all. So a lot of these cats, they had severe depression and related mental health issues that included, like, even cutting their bodies and other forms of mutilation, even unfortunately a few attempted suicides. So again, most prisons are not, set up quite to that extreme. But the Supermax model is basically, again, on the isolation of prisoners. Again, you got the most dangerous of the dangerous. So not sure if you've ever seen like the film Con Air with Nicolas Cage, where you got all these convicts on the airplane, and those cats there, like, you got the grimiest of the grimiest that are coming from a Supermax prison. One cat, like, we got to fly you with a straight jacket, man, and we got to even like make sure that your mouth is muzzled. You can't, even use that as a weapon. These are the type of individuals that you would have in a Supermax normally. There's some folks, and then also like, people like, that have committed like, mass violent crimes. So we began the class, for example, talking about, the Boston Marathon bomber. So he will be in a Supermax prison. Terry Nichols, is accused. I think that was the dude. I was gonna say the Atlanta Olympics, but I don't think that's him. I think Terry Nichols may have been an abortion clinic bomber. But people like that, mass murderers. Others include Chicago gang leaders, Larry Hoover and Jeff Fort. Viewed as very dangerous. And in these cases, there's heavy debate, about, how much of a physical danger Larry Hoover and Jeff Ford is. Both of these cats got to be up in their 70s now. I think Jeff Ford may have even passed since this publication. But nonetheless, they're more dangerous because of, their ideology and their sway and things like that. Mafia dons, people like that may be in these kind of prisons because if they were amongst just even a max prison amongst general population, particularly if there are rivals or enemies up in there, which almost always there will be, it just would be too dangerous. Sometimes even too dangerous for them. Another example, again, in Florence, Colorado, it's a 484-bed facility. And one of the things that you want to make note of when we talk about these prisons is the advances in technology. You got 168 video cameras. You got electronically controlled gates. Cells are angled in this supermax prison where the prisoners can never see each other. And again, you can make all types of things in prison out of weapons. This flash drive I have, oh my God. They could probably do some real damage up in there with this. Gouge your eye out, motherfucker, with this flash drive. I'm gonna get you. Like real talk, like they probably could really, definitely could fashion it into a knife, sharpen this up. Boom, got you. So as a result of, these experiences that prison guards and wardens have had for generations, anything that has potential to be a weapon is removed. Toilet seats, toilet handles, soap dishes, all that stuff. You do get a bed and even a desk, but it's made out of cement. Nothing that can be moved. You probably do get a mattress on the top of your cement, but nothing that you can move itself. The designs of the prisons, again, are are very deliberate. I was getting ready to some of these classes get mixed up. So I was getting ready to go into some urban sociology, but I'm pretty sure none of you all are taking that with me. You're not in that class now. And it talks about how cities were designed in such a way to kind of create a certain environment. The same thing holds true in prisons in terms of how they were built and designed. The radio design, the telephone pole design, courtyard, campus, all are different models, and they break these down in more detail in the text. Some of them should be obviously, again, radio, again, where you see, where it's almost like at the warden in the middle, and all the cells are like, in the circles around, like the center stage, if you will. Others, again, like, courtyards, telephone pole design where, cells are kind of stacked on top of each other. And again, check this out in the text because, they, actually have some illustrations that kind of reflect these really well as well, where you can see what these look like as opposed to just seeing it here in the abstract. And one of the things, again, you want to make note of is the new prison technology where more and more electrical fences are being built. They're doing things where they just scan your iris. This is particularly important, again, like, so as opposed to having like an ID or something like that that can potentially be stolen. If you're an inmate and you got somebody's, key or some other scanning device, it will take a lot more to get their iris. So the kind of things that you see in movies and stuff, come into place. Let's look at some of the technologies that you'll see in modern prisons a little bit more closely before we get ready to close for the day. Again, as our world has advanced, it's required that the facilities and security functions of prison also advance and evolve as well. And my have they evolved? Where again, in the name of keeping, the public safe, and obviously these type of technologies that we're talking about here, this ain't something that you're gonna see like in a minimum security prison where cats are in there for less a year because they have like a petty assault. These again are your Jeffrey Dahmer type cats that your uh, Islamic terrorists type, where if they get out, there's major, dangerous consequences to the general public for that. So they have like some of these, max and super max facilities. They have like ground penetrating radar. There are systems that, again, like have heartbeat monitoring. They have electrified fences that they've like, repackaged where they won't kill you like the old school ones will. You're going to be messed up pretty bad, but you won't die. And as we talk about more and more biometric recognition systems, using the eyes, face scans, things of that nature, again, to identify, with a lot more precision, the only individuals that have, access to certain wings of the prison or the prison more generally. As always, when you see something italics, it's something you really want to study closely. So make sure that you really give this some, a great deal of attention. But ideally, again, even with, all the advent of technology and the tools that, and even scientific information in terms of what we understand about, human behavior and inmates, even with all those advances, nothing really like is going to be more effective than having a warden who actually is just going to be very proactive about predicting which issues may come about and nipping them in the bud before it gets to a point where you have to worry about all these advanced security measures. Again, like you all may take on many jobs within the criminal justice system throughout your career shortly. And one of the things that you might want to do is serve as a warden of a prison, the boss, the person that runs the prison. And some of the best wardens, again, they're effective because they believe they actually can make a difference. It's not just a job to them. They want to really effectively, again, keep the public safe. That's really important. So they believe they can make a difference in that regard, but also in terms of like helping to turn around the lives of some of these young men and women that come into their institutions. Only a psychopath is going to be delighted at, seeing people's, lives, compromised this way in a way that it is when you have to do a prison sentence. But if they have to be there, these ones again want to make sure that that they're treated fairly, that their guards are treated fairly, and everybody can end the day alive and healthy. They want to run their prisons in a way where again the inmates and staff both have hope and confidence and respect for each other. When you create a hopeless environment for a prisoner, that creates a more dangerous environment for your guards. And again, people that feel like they have something to lose or something to strive for often just respond very differently. That's why, again, creating that a lot of times we talk about we want to make the experience for prisoners as difficult as possible. We want to create a difficult environment. That's fine if you don't have to be anywhere near the consequences of those choices. They realize very early that it takes a team and that they want to have order and structure in terms of how they operate the prison. They want to be models of the behaviors that they want to see exhibited. If you again, if you want to get treated with respect as a warden, as a guard, obviously it helps if you can begin by giving it yourself. And then having clarity on goals and principles, that would seem like intuitive and straightforward, but oftentimes it's not. So by this mean like, okay, what if you become warden today, Savannah? what would you like to do? Or what would success look like? What would happen for your staff? What would happen for the inmates themselves? What would your goals be, and why do you think those goals are important? That's where your principles come in. And try and operate a plan in a teamwork in a team-oriented fashion, ideally, that allows you to be able to like meet out these goals successfully. Now, don't freak out and panic. Even though it says midterm exam on here today, your midterm exam is not until Wednesday, March 10th at 2 p.m. But we will close class here for the day. We can review on Monday if you all have any questions about anything. Please make sure that you look at the syllabus to see what's supposed to be on the exam and start studying now. Don't wait until the weekend. I'll see you all on Monday.